I grew up in Marosvásárhely, that's the name of the city I grew up in, but the city has 3 names already, so it was a mixed language city, so it has a Romanian name too, it's called Târgu Mureș in Romanian, and it has a German name too, it's called Neumarkt in German. So basically, you could speak, I grew up in a neighborhood where half of the people were Romanian, you could say. So I really learned my Romanian on the street, fighting, playing. I learned it quite early. I think I was 7. No, when I was 7 or 8, I spoke it quite more or less fluently. Then I learned a bit of German too, because it was customary to speak all the 3 languages. These are the 3 main languages in Transylvania. Sometimes people would go in 3 different kindergartens to learn each language, or more or less to be able to speak it. It was customary with my friends, with my Romanian friends. Very often they would speak to me in Hungarian and I would answer in Romanian, so we would speak each other's language. That was customary as a... My name actually means translator, so my name is Dragomán, and this is actually comes from Armenian. My family is partly Armenian, or on my father's side we have Armenian ancestors. So I knew that this means translator, and I knew that somehow I hail from a long line of translators. The first one, I wanted to become a writer very early on, so I was 30 when I realized I wanted to become a writer. And then I had this notion that maybe translation will help me learn about literature. So I was, I think, 14 when I started translating short stories from English to see how they work. It was a very good idea, I think. So even nowadays, when young people approach me, or people who want to be writers approach me with the question, what should they do, I always suggest to them that they should translate. Because if you take apart a short story, then that's the closest you can get to the text if you try to translate it. The first book I chose was A Nyugati Hadtest by János Székely. He's a writer from Transylvania. He's a well-known poet and playwright, and his prose work is not so well-known. And I think this volume, A Nyugati Hadtest, is one of the, for me, it's one of the best Hungarian books ever. So basically, it's about the lost Second World War. So how the Western Corps, I mean the Hungarian Corps who are coming back from the Soviet front have lost the war, experience this loss, and it's a story it's a novel of linked short stories, and I think 9 stories in all, and it's about defeat and about how people were made and forced to fight in this war against their will, and it's a very each story is about somehow this change, how war changes you. Most of his work is autobiographical, but this novel is an exception. This novel is not about his. Most of his books are focused about his father. So he tries to. He grew up as an orphan, and he tried to learn who his father was. And those are very interesting projects. Those novels are also very good. But this one is an exception. This one is a book about Budapest, basically about Budapest on the turn of the 19th century, and that's a very interesting epoch, because that's when Budapest was basically created. And the old Budapest was destroyed more or less, and the Budapest as we know it was being built. So it was a very, very interesting time. And this novel is basically a crime novel. You know. But what is more interesting, I think the main hero of the book is Budapest, how Budapest was being created. And for me this was a very personal choice, because when I moved to Budapest, I used this book as an introduction to the city, even though lots of things changed. But I read this book a lot, I think 3 or 4 times, and whenever I walk around the city and try to learn to love it, I would use this book as a guide somehow. Basically, this is an utopia somehow. So what happens, someone is kidnapped, we don't know why, we don't know how, and he finds himself in a cave where smiths are forging swords. They are being forced to forge swords, and both each of the Smith, I think there are three Smiths there, and he is the fourth one, and the newcomer. So each have historical names of well-known mythological Smiths, and somehow they don't know why, but they get all the materials they need, and they try to recreate the Japanese blade. And the book is not just an introduction to the technology of sword making. It's basically a book about the whole of the Western culture and freedom in dictatorship. It's a very clever book, but beautifully written.